May 16th, 2009. Cannes, France. The lights dimmed inside the Grand Théâtre Lumière, and a film began that would send the audience out of their seats trembling. The festival knew it had seen something dangerous. And 8 days after that, on the night of May 24th, a jury made up of some of the most respected filmmakers on earth handed Jacques Audiard the Grand Prix. But that is not the moment that matters. The moment that matters happens about 40 minutes into the film. A 19-year-old kid, illiterate, small, alone, is sitting on the edge of a filthy prison bed. There is a razor blade hidden inside his mouth. He has been rehearsing for days how to hold it against his gum without slicing his own tongue in half. In a few minutes, he's going to walk into a cell, kiss another man on the neck, and then open his throat with that blade. Blood is going to spray across a mirror. And a boy who came in with nothing is going to become something the French state never intended to create. A criminal, an operator, a prophet. This is not just a movie. This is the story of how modern European prisons manufacture the very men they were built to contain. And to understand why A Prophet became one of the most important crime films of the 21st century, you have to understand what was actually happening inside French prisons in the years leading up to 1995. The years the film draws from, you have to understand who really ran those cells. You have to understand the Corsican mob that inspired Cesar Luciani. And you have to understand the young Maghrebi kids who kept arriving year after year into a system that had already been carved up between old-world gangsters and new-world outsiders. Here is what most people watching that film in 2009 did not know. Director Jacques Audiard has said, on record, that A Prophet is a work of fiction. It is not the biography of a specific man. There is no real Malik el-Jabena walking the streets of Paris today. But that same director also said something else, something that matters more. He said he was shocked when he first walked into a French prison to screen one of his earlier films. He saw the overcrowding. He saw the ethnic segregation. He saw the way power inside the walls did not belong to the guards. It belonged to whoever had the discipline and the connections to hold it. That is what he put on screen. And every single element of that world, the Corsican control, the Maghrebi underclass, the drug routes, the corrupted guards, the killing of informants, the recruitment of the young and the isolated, all of it was real. All of it was documented. All of it was happening while he wrote. This is the story of that world. To understand how a Corsican prison boss like Cesar Luciani could exist, you have to go back to a bar in the old port of Bastia, northern Corsica, in the late 1970s. The bar was called La Brise de Mer, the Sea Breeze. It was run by a man named Antoine Castelli, and in the back of that bar, a group of young Corsican criminals started meeting to plan robberies. In the beginning, they were amateurs. On one of their first jobs, they forgot to bring their weapons. They arrived at the target and realized they had no guns. That is how small they started. But something happened in Corsica between 1979 and 1981. The island became unstable. Nationalist violence was rising. The old crime families were fracturing. And this group from the Sea Breeze Bar started organizing. On September 10th, 1981, they assassinated the reigning godfather of Haute Corse, a man named Louis Memy, gunning him down as he returned home. That was the day the Brise de Mer gang stopped being kids in a bar and became a criminal organization. Within a decade, they were running racketeering, illegal slot machines, laundering, nightclubs, gambling houses, and casinos across Corsica, Marseille, Paris, and into Italy. Their capital was estimated at between 120 million and 150 million euros, a core of roughly 10 families with hundreds of members and associates orbiting them. Investments in tourism, construction, hotels, and casinos stretching into Gabon, Mali, Cameroon, and Latin America. In 1990, they robbed a UBS bank in Geneva. In 1991, they got into a deadly shootout near a Securipost armored truck. In 1992, they hit an Air France Mercure plane. This was not a street gang. This was a corporation with guns. And here is where the film gets its architecture. Because the Brise de Mer had a rule: Corsicans do not trust anyone but Corsicans. Blood, language, island. That was the Trinity. When their people went to prison, and they did, in waves through the 1980s and 90s, they carried that discipline with them. They organized inside the walls the same way they organized on the outside. They controlled the cells assigned to them. They cultivated guards. They ran cigarette rackets and phone rackets and eventually drugs. Two men rose inside that structure in particular. Francis Mariani, known for his commanding presence and iron leadership, and Richard Casanova, the smoother operator, the one who cultivated businessmen and international contacts. Casanova was the diplomat. Mariani was the enforcer. Together, they were the closest thing in real French criminal history to the figure Neil Zarastrup plays on screen. And their eventual falling out, their bloody split in the mid-2000s, mirrors almost exactly the fracturing paranoia that defines Cesar Luciani in the second half of the film. You have to understand something else. The prison Audiard imagined for Malik was not exotic. It was a composite of real places. Fleury-Mérogis, the massive facility south of Paris, built through the mid-60s and opened in 1968, designed for roughly 3,000 inmates. By 2009, when A Prophet premiered, it held more than 4,100. It was the largest prison in Europe, and it had a reputation. It was called by French journalists a factory, not for reform, for radicalization, for criminal networking, for turning small-time offenders into hardened operators. Around the time of the film's release, French inmates were roughly 7 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population, among the worst rates in Europe. And the national system was bursting, running more than 13,000 inmates above its official capacity at its late 2000s peak, with men doubled and tripled into cells designed for one. And inside that overcrowding was a demographic reality that shaped everything. By the sociological estimates published in the years surrounding the film, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the French prison population was Muslim, and in the big facilities ringing Paris, Lyon, and Marseille, researchers put the figure as high as 70%. Muslims made up roughly 8 to 10% of the country. That gap is not a statistic. That gap is the whole story. Because when a boy from a housing project in Bobigny or Marseille or Villiers-le-Bel walked through those gates for the first time, he walked into a world where his people were the majority in the yard but the minority in power. The old money, the old rackets, the old protection networks belonged to men who spoke Corsican in the shower and French to the guards. The young men who kept flooding in were left to build something new from nothing, or to be swallowed. That is the world Malik El-Jabena walks into. 19 years old, 6 years, sentenced for attacking police officers. He cannot read, he cannot write. He has no gang, no family visitor list, no lawyer on retainer. He is not a Muslim in any devout sense. He is not a Corsican. He is nothing. He is what the French sociologists at the time were calling la deuxième génération, the second generation. In the film, Malik gets off the bus at the prison gate holding a plastic bag with a change of clothes. That image is not fiction. That is thousands of intake photos from Fleury-Mérogis in the 1990s. And within days, the man who runs the yard finds him. In the film, he is called Cesar Luciani. On the page, he was first written by Abdel Raouf Dafri, the screenwriter who had already made his name writing Mezrine. Dafri wrote the original script with Nicolas Pouffailly. Then it went to Audiard and Thomas Bidegain, who spent years tearing it down and rebuilding it. But the character of Cesar, the 50-something Corsican who controls a wing of the prison through a combination of terror, patronage, and inside connections with guards, that character was drawn from a specific historical reality. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Corsican inmates in French prisons routinely held that kind of power. They had the discipline. They had the family networks on the outside sending in money and lawyers. They had guards who owed them favors or feared their people. And they had one thing the Maghrebi inmates did not yet have. They had time. Generations of it. Now here is where the story gets interesting. Because in the film, Cesar gives Malik a choice that is not a choice. A new inmate named Rayeb has just arrived. He is Arab. He is being held briefly before he testifies in a trial against Corsican interests. He has to be silenced. And Cesar cannot use his own men to do it, because Rayeb is suspicious of Corsicans. Rayeb might, though, trust an Arab kid. So Cesar tells Malik, "Kill Rayeb, or you die." The mechanics of that kill are the most talked about sequence in the film. And here is what the writers themselves said about it. They did research on the daily rhythms of prison, what time meals arrived, how mail was distributed, what corridors connected what wings. But the specific technique, the razor blade hidden in the cheek, that was fiction. That was invented for the film. Malik practices holding the blade between his teeth and his gum for hours. He learns to speak with it inside his mouth without cutting himself. He almost swallows it once. He almost chokes on his own blood. And then he walks into Rayeb's cell, is invited to sit down, is offered something to drink, leans in, spits the blade into his hand, and cuts. That scene is not on screen because Audiard wanted violence. That scene is on screen because Audiard wanted to show the exact moment a system converts a victim into an operator. Before that scene, Malik is a boy who was picked up on a scuffle and thrown into an institution. After that scene, he is a killer, and every Corsican in the wing knows it. And every Arab in the yard suspects it, and Malik himself, walking back to his cell with blood on his shirt, throwing up in a sink, seeing the ghost of Rayeb sitting on his bed for the rest of his sentence, he knows the door back to his old life has closed. That is the alchemy of the modern European prison. That is what Audiard captured. That is what human rights observers had been writing about for years without anyone listening. Because here is what actually happened in French prisons in the years around the film's release. In May 2001, several Corsican gangsters escaped from Borgo prison near Bastia, when a fake fax arrived from a judge ordering their release. Read that again. Someone forged court paperwork and faxed them out the front door, and one of the men who walked free that day was Francis Mariani himself. That is the level of institutional infiltration we are talking about. In 2005, an assassination attempt against Mariani failed. The retaliation cascaded for years. Richard Casanova was murdered on April 23, 2008, ambushed with a war weapon outside a garage in Porto Vecchio. 9 months later, in January 2009, Mariani, by then the prime suspect in his old friend's killing, was blown apart in the unexplained explosion of a hangar in Haute Course, identified only by his DNA and his teeth. And in November 2009, the exact year A Prophet was released in French theaters, Francis Guazelli, another founding member of the gang, was shot dead. What Audiard put on screen as the paranoid unraveling of Cesar Luciani, betrayed by his own men, watching his empire crumble in real time, that was happening in the newspapers as audiences were buying their tickets. But there is another layer here. And it is the layer that lifts A Prophet from being a good gangster film to being something historians will study 50 years from now. Because Malik does not just survive, he learns. He watches Cesar make phone calls to the outside. He listens. He picks up Corsican words. He memorizes routes. He memorizes names. He memorizes who owes what to whom. And when Cesar starts sending him on day passes, French prison policy at the time allowed short furloughs for well-behaved inmates. Malik does not just run errands. He builds his own network. He befriends a hashish dealer known as Jordi the Gypsy. He bonds with an inmate named Ryad, a man dying of cancer but connected to the Paris drug trade on the outside. And Malik begins doing what no one in that prison expects. He begins acting on his own account. The scheme he runs is worth breaking down, because it is a textbook example of how modern European prison economies actually function. Step 1. The opportunity. Malik has legal day passes. He can walk out of the prison in the morning and be back by night. That is a rare and enormously valuable privilege. Step 2. The inside connection. Riyadh, dying but plugged into networks in the Paris Banlieue, provides the contacts, introductions, names of people who move product. Step 3. The execution. On his day passes, Malik meets suppliers, negotiates prices for hashish shipments coming north from Spain through Marseille, and arranges deliveries to distribution points in the Paris suburbs. He is running these deals while officially still an inmate. Step 4. The money. In the film, the sums begin in the tens of thousands of euros and rise into the hundreds of thousands as the operation scales. Real French police reports from the same era document exactly this pattern. Step 5. The problem. Malik is now running product on the same territory the Corsicans consider theirs. He is doing it under Caesar's nose. And the moment Cesar realizes what is happening, the moment he understands the boy he made is now competing with him, everything Cesar is becomes a threat to Malik, and everything Malik is becomes a betrayal of Cesar. That is the engine of the third act. And the reason it works, the reason it does not feel like screenwriting invention, is that it mirrors the actual power shift that took place inside French prisons across the exact decade the film covers. From the mid-1990s through the mid-2000s, the demographic and criminal balance of the French prison system inverted. In 1990, Corsican inmates and their allied networks controlled the majority of internal contraband, protection, and communication rackets inside major French prisons. The Maghrebi and West African prison populations had grown so large and so networked that new criminal ecosystems had emerged. Not one gang, not one hierarchy, dozens of overlapping networks trading in hash, phones, protection, and increasingly, ideology. That last word is the darkest thread in this story, because the same French prisons that were producing the Maliks of the world, the pragmatic operators building drug networks, were also producing the men who would go on to commit the terrorist attacks of 2015 and 2016.
To be Amadi Koulibaly held up that supermarket, took hostages, killed 4 innocent people. And
in January 2015, was radicalized inside Fleury-Mérogis. Cherif Kouachi, one of the Charlie Hebdo attackers, was radicalized inside Fleury-Mérogis, in the very same wing, under the influence of the very same jailed recruiter. That prison, the facility that inspired the sprawling, overcrowded institution Audiard filmed, became known internationally as one of the primary incubators of jihadist violence in Europe. A prophet does not touch that theme directly. Malik does not radicalize. Malik goes the other way, into the pragmatic, secular, criminal underworld. But the film is haunted by the same institutional truth. Prisons that mix the vulnerable, the ambitious, and the powerful, without supervision, without programs, without hope, do not neutralize crime. They perfect it. They introduce boys who could barely read to men who ran international networks, and whichever direction the boy chooses to go afterward, the direction is set the day he walks in. Here is the piece that most reviewers missed in 2009. Malik is not a hero. Malik is what a broken system produces when you feed it a boy. Audiard has said that the arc he wanted to draw was of a homeless character who, at the beginning, does not have the words to tell his own story, and who by the end has a home, a family, a wife, and child. On paper, that sounds redemptive. On screen, it is the opposite, because Malik gets those things by killing, betraying, dealing, and calculating. The system did not make him virtuous. The system taught him to be strategic. He arrives illiterate. He leaves fluent in 3 languages, connected to 2 continents, and stepping into a car with an armed protection detail. That is the transformation the French state paid for with 6 years of his life. In the film, Malik walks out of the prison at the end of his sentence. He is met by Jamila and her son, the family he inherited from Riyadh, who died of cancer while Malik was inside. Behind them, a black SUV pulls up. Men get out. His men They fall in behind him as he walks. The camera pulls back, and you understand that the young man who was terrified on the bus in the first scene is now the boss of something. Something bigger, more organized, and more dangerous than the Corsican operation that first pressed him into service. He did not escape the system. He inherited it. The ripple effects in real life are still unfolding. The Brise de Mer coalition, once the dominant force in Corsican organized crime, has fragmented since 2008 into rival factions. More than 100 killings on Corsica have been attributed to the internal war between the Brise de Mer successors and the Southern Alliance built around the legacy of Jean-Jérôme Colonna, the godfather of the South, who died in a car crash in 2006 that investigators never fully accepted as an accident. And as of a 2025 French judicial police report, roughly 20 Mafia-style organizations still operate out of Corsica, dominated today by the Petite Bar Gang in the south and the Mattei clan in the north, with reach into mainland France, construction, hospitality, real estate, and international trafficking. The characters change. The structure does not. Meanwhile, the French prison population continues to break records. As of September 1st, 2024, French prisons held 78,969 inmates, against a capacity of 62,014. Overcrowding at more than 127% nationally. In remand centers, over 150%, and past 200% in more than a dozen facilities. 3,600 people sleeping on mattresses on the floor. Every one of those prisoners is a potential Malik, a potential Rayeb, a potential Koulibaly. The system that Audiard filmed has not been reformed. It has been expanded. So what does a prophet actually reveal? It reveals that the border between organized crime and the state is thinner than any government wants to admit. It reveals that when you concentrate the vulnerable, the ambitious, and the connected in a single overcrowded building for years at a time, you do not produce rehabilitation. You produce apprenticeship. It reveals that the old European mafias, the Corsicans, the Marseille clans, the survivors of the French Connection era, did not die. They just moved into the last territory where the state could not fully reach them, the cell block. And it reveals that the young men who walked into those cell blocks as nothing came out, when they came out at all, as something the French Republic never planned for. Malik el-Jabena does not exist. But every year, French prisons produce boys who look exactly like him. Some of them go on to run drug routes from Marseille to Paris. Some of them go on to strap explosives to their chests. And some of them go on to become the exact men the Corsicans once were, cutting deals through prison walls, running economies through cigarette smoke, teaching the next generation the trade. Jacques Audiard did not invent this world. He just held up a camera to a door that most of France would rather leave closed. And what came out of that door was a razor blade in a boy's mouth, and the terrible arithmetic of what it costs to survive a system built to break you.